call me Crazy Joe, but now they can call me Batman.
Well, welcome back once again to the Necro Zoo. I am Bones. And in this one, let's go ahead and add one more Megafig to my McFarlane DC Multiverse collection. Now, today we will take a look at the DC Classics version of Darkseid. Now, I have heard on the streets that although this was a really anticipated figure and a lot of people were looking forward to this one, it does have some glaring major issues. Now, I will do my best to break these down, take a look at the negatives, take a look at the positives, do a little bit of fixing, and adding my own accessories to this figure. In the end, all we can do is have the most fun we can have with these and take them for what they are. Now, there was a debate online if people really wanted this old school classic superpowers version of Darkseid, or a lot of people really wanted a newer modern age version of Darkseid. Now, having a long history in the DC Comics universe, Darkseid has been portrayed in many different ways, even up till now. He does not look anything like he looked when he was originally conceived by the great Jack Kirby. Now, this is the figure we have received, so I'll try to make the best of it. Now, he does look pretty supreme in the packaging, but let's go ahead and take a closer look at him. Of course, he does come with your standard black DC Multiverse stand. Now, this one's not really needed, especially for this figure. He does have a pretty good stance, but sometimes they do come in useful. He also comes with his data file card. On the front, you have an image. Now, I did investigate this and look up some images online. There is a version of Darkseid that pretty much represents what we see here on the card. Is it a more superpowers version? Is it a more DC Classics version? Now, that's definitely up to our interpretation, but definitely it is not a more modern take or even a 90s, 2000s version of Darkseid. And even now in the modern age, Darkseid's image has really changed, and he's portrayed as a brute with a lot of force. And we have to understand he is the supreme ruler of the planet Apocalypse. Pretty cool. On the back, you do have some information. So we'll hold on to this. Now, he does come with some accessories. He comes with 2 alternate hands. Now, per usual, I like to review the figures with 2 fists, so I added 2 fists. But he does come with an alternate right gripping hand and a left pointing hand. Now, these are pretty cool for figure photography, gesturing, displaying the figure. So, of course, these are nothing to laugh at. It's pretty awesome that he does come with some alternate hands. He also comes with an alternate head. Now, originally he comes with this head in the packaging, but of course I wanted to review him with a more neutral look. But if you prefer, you can display him with this Omega Beam head sculpt. Now, of course, the Omega Beams are one of Darkseid's major weapons when he does battle. Pretty devastating and brutal power that he has, where he shoots some deadly beams from his eyes. Now, they did a pretty good job with this one, portraying the Omega lights coming out from his eyes. They are just a clear, soft, transparent plastic. So we'll hold on to that head as well. Now, this does mean that although I only have this figure right now, I am going to be looking at picking up another one. That way I can display one with the Omega Beam head and one with the regular standard head. But no hurry, I'll eventually get into doing that. But that's it for the accessories. Let's go ahead and take a closer look at this guy. Now, He does have, a couple of big flaws that I will point out, but there is some pretty cool stuff about him. He is very photogenic and he does have an aura to him. Once you get him in hand, he's fun to pose, especially once you fix some of the errors that I really feel are a negative with this figure. But first impressions, you really have to take into consideration that this is a closer to old school original version of Darkseid. Really captures the look. In fact, you don't really see that D emblem that he has on his chest. I mean, that's something you rarely see, especially nowadays with the more modern interpretations of Darkseid. So that's really going back to the classic rendition of Darkseid. And, that leaves it open for in the future to receive an alternate version of this character. So, not really a big deal that this is a more classic style version of Darkseid, but I do like the color blue that they used because that is more representative of the old school color scheme. When you look at him now in these times, a lot, in a more modern take, it's a little bit more of a darker blue or even a purplish color, which I enjoy as well. And as I said, that allows for another version of this Darkseid to be released in the future, and then maybe they can address some of the issues that people had with this release of Darkseid. But all in all, great looking version of the leader of Apocalypse. Now, this all being from that fourth world, that was built by Jack Kirby with all that alien technology. And it has a very signature style of artwork and design when you look into the fourth world and how it is portrayed in comics. Pretty nice. Like I said, it's a really great rendition of Darkseid. He does have a little bit of presence with him. So I am really happy to add this guy to the collection. Taking a look at the head sculpt now, this is a very strange version of a head sculpt because they did make it to where it's a plug. So of course that's going to reduce the articulation. But first off, taking a look at the actual sculpt work and design does look very good. I mean, there's different versions of Darkseid you could take from the comics and even from forms of entertainment, movies, animation. But for your more classic, original version of Darkseid, this is a good in between spot from comics to action figures. So, really enjoy the head sculpt. A lot of detail, some pretty cool painting around the eyes to give it some depth. And of course, he has that, encasing headgear that he wears that is very much a signature look for Darkseid. Pretty awesome. Now, talking about the articulation, he can look down very well. That's cool for, poses when you're looking down upon your enemy. But looking up is going to be a no go. I mean, you can slightly get him to look up, but there's pretty much nothing there, and that is because of the way they did the head plug. Now, I'm gonna take a look at some older releases of Darkseid, and basically, that's always been a problem with Darkseid figures because of the way the head is designed. There's minimal articulation in the head, so it's nothing new, especially with this head harness that he wears. You got right to left. And of course, you could tilt his head for some attitude. So, all in all, it's good enough, not great articulation in the head, but for Darkseid, that is sufficient. Moving down, you could see that D that he has on that chest medallion. Really nice silver paint so that it is something that catches the eye right away. Let's take a look at the waist articulation. You do have some slight side to side, slight tilt-a-whirl. Of course, you could twist them, get them in some cool poses, but it is very minimal. Forward crunch, basically non-existent, but once again, it's kind of a reoccurring theme that happens with Darkseid figures. Lean back as well, slightly, but very minimal in the articulation. Let's take a look at the shoulders because this is going to be one of the big talking points. Now, There's a couple of things you want to do with this figure. I've seen it in a couple of reviews, and what happens is McFarlane figures usually have that socket inside of the shoulder joint that has an upper and lower little clasp. And basically, what happens is when you push the ball joint in there, it pops inside, and those little clasps lock that ball joint in there so that it does not pop out, at least not easily. Now, there's been a couple of figures released that it comes out a little bit easier than most, but this one is by far the worst executed shoulder joint. You could barely move the arm up and down, and it will pop out of the socket. Now, there is a couple of things I want to talk about when we look at this, the way I fixed mine. So I'll do that after the main review of the figure. I'll show you what I did and how it works a lot better now. You can see I could move the shoulder around and the arm will not pop out. And surprisingly, now you do get some up and down movement, some front to back. There is no bicep swivel, but he does have that elbow swivel, which kind of helps to augment the articulation without having that bicep swivel. But if you look at the arms, a lot of people were saying that these were reused from the Calibac that we have received, but if you put them together, you will see that this is not the case. I'm pretty sure this is an original sculpt. You could see all of the veins and the little sculpted out crevices. Darkseid is portrayed usually to have like almost like rock or stone skin, which with a lot of pits and pores in there, and they really captured that in this sculpture. Down into the gauntlets, which are designed really nice. But once again, it captures more of a classic look. You do have these hands that are just swivel and hinge, but for a mega fig, that is fine. And of course, on the other side, you have the same thing down into the two fists that I pose him with. Pretty nice. In my version, you can easily get him in a T pose. And of course, you can move the arms above the head. Moving down, they have this big, blocky white belt that goes across the waist. And this is what really hinders the waist articulation because it is so thick. It just does not give you any give. So that's really what reduces the articulation at the waist is this big, clunky, chunky belt. Really wish they would have done it in a little bit of a softer plastic. And speaking of that, you go down into the trunks. And aside from them also being cut a little bit wide, I'm pretty sure you could cut above the thigh to give you a little bit more range at the legs. But the other thing is the plastic is so thick that it pretty much restricts a lot of the usual articulation we would get from the trunks from a McFarlane DC Multiverse figure. Now, he does have slight thigh swivel, but that becomes pretty much a non-factor. Once you try and kick up, you lose that range of motion because of the tightness of the trunks. Really hard to get him to kick up, but if you heat this up, you can get it to bend. I will show some poses where I got him to bend down on his knees, but it's very hard. I would advise that you heat it up before you try and do any crazy posing. Although Darkseid is known for, even in battle, not really moving much. He usually likes to stick to prone poses, like with his arms behind his back. So that is a classic trait of Darkseid, is to not really move that much. So it kind of plays into his character. You do have really nice double jointed knees that look pretty good. Straighten them out. You can look at his boots. Once again, these are a different version of the ankle joints for mega figures. You do have up and down. You do not have left to right. What happens is when you turn it, it goes right into the rocker. And usually this could be bypassed by moving the thigh. But of course, as we talked about before, that movement is really restricted. But of course, he does have toe articulation. Before we move on, let's take a look at the lower body, and the legs are sculpted out really nicely. I do love the design A lot of people think the boots were a little bit high on the thigh. I tend to agree because if you look at images of Darkseid, the top of the boot usually stops right above the knee, and on this one, they go all the way up past the middle of the thigh. So, although there are versions of Darkseid like this, I'd say a majority of the versions, the boots are a little bit lower, but they are sculpted and painted in a beautiful blue. So, as not the most functional legs, they are really nice to look at. Let's go ahead and take a look at him from the bottom. No tread, but he does have some identifying marks. Moving up the back, really smooth design and transition from the boots into the legs, into the trunks. You got that thick, wide belt and into the back. It does have some sculpted details in there. Now we get to the cape. Now, I have no problem with this cape. What you do need to be able to do is manipulate it. And this is by moving little portions by portions with your fingers until you get it into the shape that you want. I know some people were unhappy with the wire that runs, horizontally from corner to corner, but these can also be manipulated into whatever shape you would like. You just have to play around with it. Another thing you could do if you really wanted to was cut the wire on each end and slide it out, and that would give you the only two wires on the side, while the main part of the cape would be free flowing. I don't want to do it, but if you want to do it, you may be able to do that. I'm actually really happy with all the posability that you can have with this wired cape to the back of that dome. Pretty interesting. Okay, so that's taking a look at the Darkseid figure. As you can see, one reason I said he's very easy to stand, the thickness of his feet, the width really make him not that difficult to stand as long as you have the sturdy ankle joints. Now, first off, let's go ahead and talk about these shoulder joints. As you can see, my Darkseid figure is now, well adjusted and able to move around without the shoulders popping out of the socket. Now, I got two tips to give when you want to repair this. And the first one is going to be the socket of the shoulder joint. I'm not sure why they did it in like a super hard plastic. I really think they should have did it in a more pliable plastic, because what ends up happening when you first get it out of the package, it tends to scrape a lot of the shoulder. There is an easy fix for this, and what I did is I got some sandpaper and just sanded out, the inner circle of that socket joint. And what that did is smoothed it out to where when you move the shoulder around, it doesn't scrape any of the shoulder, because what I was getting was like little nicks and stuff like that. And once I sanded it and softened that opening, you can move the arm around and it doesn't scrape that inner socket joint. So you get a minimal, a friction there. Now let's move on to the actual joint. Of course, as I said, you got to pop these joints, the shoulder ball pegs into that little, it's like a clasp. You have two, different, a top and a lower part of that clasp. And what I did come to find out is if you look at a lot of the figures, the mega figs, even normal McFarlane figures, they have a ridge that is right under that little clasp. And when the ball joint gets pushed in there, that little ridge holds the ball joint from coming out. And this one had a very minimal ridge. You're talking, it was so like this, flat, that when you pop in the ball joint, there's nothing really holding it from coming back out. And that is why when you move it around, it easily pops out of that clasp, because there's no flange or little ridge to hold that ball in. Now, I did have to think really hard about how I was going to fix this. And what I eventually ended up doing was I found some round plastic. Now, you do want to use a more stiffer plastic. It can't be, a soft rubber. It has to be really rigid. And then I cut like a circular piece out of it and cut two half moons, a really thin slither. I mean, it didn't take a lot. And what I ended up doing was first I super glued it to the top part of that clasp, but I had to really let it dry. And even once it dried, I went ahead and added some Gorilla Glue. And I knew this was going to take a couple of days. So, although I should have done this review during the week, I ended up doing it now on the weekend because I did want to give it enough time to dry and make that little ridge almost into a solid piece where there's no way it would move out of the way or bend or anything like that. So I had to let it dry for at least 4, 5 days before I felt comfortable enough to try and shove that ball inside of that clasp. Now, even this was pretty difficult because what I ended up having to do was push down more on the lower clasp so that it wouldn't hit that little ridge that I added and push it down to where it bent a little bit. And then I shoved in the ball and it just barely, squeezed past that little ridge that I made. But what ended up happening is now I think I will never be able to remove these shoulders unless I want to break that little ridge that I made, and I don't want to break it. I'm happy with this, so I won't put too much force like I'm trying to yank it out. But you can move it and manipulate it around. You can even bend the elbows, which was really hard to do when the shoulders were in their original state. But you could see from this little clip that I can manipulate it. I could move it around. I could, swing him on one arm, and his shoulders do not pop out of socket. Now, we all know that when the shoulders pop out of socket on a McFarlane figure, this is kind of the way they are designed, and that is so that the arm, the little bell, doesn't break. So you'd rather have that ball pop out of the socket than for the actual piece to snap in half. But this was just way way too easy to pop out. You could not move the arms at all, and they would pop out. And then plus the scraping of the plastic was another issue that I had with this figure. But as you can see, now I am happy with him. Once you get this fixed, any way that you could fix it, he does become a little bit more fun, a little bit fun to do figure photography and posing. Once you are confident that the shoulder will not pop out of socket. So that got me into, like posing him with the alternate head, having a little bit of fun with him. And I can really see how people that aren't into customizing or don't want to have to mess with their figures, this really hits the fun factor and really makes it a big disappointment. So I do feel that McFarlane needs to address this, and this cannot be happening on these figures. So I do understand that, and I'm not here to, praise everything McFarlane makes. I do understand how it feels when you just want to pose your figure and the arms pop out, and there's really no easy way to fix it without going to have to, reconstruct it and do some really hard customizing that I had to do. But one thing I will say, and that is that once I completed it and the shoulders, really hold up on their own, it really took this figure to a completely different level and made them a lot of fun. And I'm really appreciative to have them in the collection. Now, I did want to bring out older releases of Darkseid, and you can even go back all the way to the DC Superheroes version. Now, this was a 6-inch scale line, and I feel like the way they messed up is that he is perfectly the same height as any other 6-inch figure, not any shorter and not any taller. While I think Darkseid should really at least be a couple of inches taller than your standard scale. So if Batman was going to be this tall, this Darkseid really should have been a little bit taller. But as far as execution and design wise, it's a really awesome looking Darkseid. He does have the same negative things, like the head is really limited in the articulation, as well as the legs, because the skirt on this one really hold the articulation back where you can't even get him to sit or do any type of poses. The legs are really stuck in just, a straight up and down position. But as far as looks and designs, I feel like this is something that people would have enjoyed more than this classic version, and maybe we will see this in the future. Take off the cape, add the skirt, although it will really minimize the articulation, but it's just a more traditional look for Darkseid. Now, of course, I do have the DC Universe Classics collectible figure of Darkseid, and he is more reminiscent of this superheroes version, but he has the same issues. The head cannot articulate. You only have left to right basically on this figure. The articulation is very minimal. Even at the waist, which you would think they use that, chest hinge, and it still has minimal articulation. Almost You almost don't get any more out of this one than you do out of the McFarlane version, because that hinge just doesn't give you any articulation at all. And of course, with the skirt or the tunic that this Darkseid has, the legs are really limited in the articulation as well. But as far as design goes, I will say again, this is more what people expect to see when they look for a Darkseid figure, and even more a more classic version. Of course, there is a more modern look for Darkseid that has been released by different lines, but this is more your traditional, old school, classic version of Darkseid. Now, the cool thing about him was he came with some awesome accessories. Like you have this control box, sort of that fourth world technology. I did take some pictures with him holding this. It does work for the McFarlane version, or even keep it on your DC Classics Darkseid figure. And another thing he came with was the Darkseid Kill Glove. Now, you don't really see this a lot in the comics. I think nowadays you see more of the Omega Beams. That's like his main weapon. But he did have this in the original Jack Kirby stories. He used this Kill Glove. Now, this was easy to swap out, so you could have options for posing. But as I always say, most DC Classic accessories work with your McFarlane figures. Now, I did have to modify the ball joint to be able to fit into the McFarlane version, but once I did that, it does fit, and you can get some awesome figure photography with the Kill Glove. So that's a cool little addition you can add if you own the original DC Classics version. Now, finally, I was really curious about how Calabac scaled with this Darkseid. For some reason, I thought he was going to be way shorter, but he is a little bit taller, although not as girthy, because in the comics, of course, Calabac is like one of his generals, so he's more of a beast figure. And you can really see how there is no reuse at all from this Calabac into this Darkseid Megafig. Now, I really hope in the future we could get some more fourth world characters. We're still waiting on our Mr. Miracle and Barda. We have Orion, which is Darkseid's adopted son, and you have a host of characters from that world created and built by Jack Kirby. And anyways, guys, as I always say, there's ups and downs from McFarlane's DC Multiverse. A lot of highlights, but definitely a lot of fails. The only thing I can do is work with it as best as I can, and that is what I did with this figure. But you guys keep hunting out there, keep collecting, keep customizing, and I will see you on the next.
They used to call me Crazy Joe, but now they can call me Batman.